Hello, I'm Jay Nicoll from Nicoll Investigations, and I'm here to tell you about the next episode of Ontario Cold Cases, the podcast, coming this Sunday, May 5th, on the murder of Brenda Stinson. Brenda Stinson, 23 of Peterborough, was found naked and beaten in the ditch on Sawyers Creek Road, south of Lakefield, May 12, 1984. The mother of one last being seen earlier that day at the Trent Inn in Peterborough at 12:15 a.m. Brenda attended Kenner Collegiate Vocational Institute but had not finished. At the time of her death, she was living with her parents in Peterborough with her 5-year-old son, Johnny. Please consider subscribing to Ontario Cold Cases, the podcast, on Patreon, Spotify, YouTube, or Apple Podcasts. Hello, I'm Jay Nicoll from Nicoll Investigations, and I'm here to tell you about some of the upcoming episodes of Ontario Cold Cases, a podcast, on the disappearance of Stacy DiLenardi. Stacy DiLenardi had lived in Sudbury his entire life. In September 2005, when he was 31 years old, he moved to Sault Ste. Marie, Garden River, to start a new job as a technician at the Ontario Forest Research Institute, or OFRI. He still kept in touch with his family in Sudbury. November 27, 2005, Stacy spoke to his father on the phone. On the morning of November 28, he went to work wearing beige pants and a beige khaki vest over a blue-sleeved sweater. He also left work at lunch and drove his 2003 red Chevrolet Cavalier to Sewell's Gas Bar, located on the Rankin Reserve at 436 Frontenac Street. He purchased some Players Light cigarettes. What happened next remains a mystery. Investigators launched an extensive search for Stacy following his disappearance. On December 1st, 2005, his abandoned vehicle was found disabled 7 kilometers in on Connor Road in Duncan Township, 13.5 kilometers from where he was last seen. Some reports describe the location as a snowmobile trail, 15 kilometers behind Garden River First Nation Reserve. No other evidence was found, and the search was called off due to heavy snowfall. In April 2006, investigators conducted a second search over 20 days. In May, the search was called off. No evidence of Stacy DiLenardi's whereabouts was ever found. At the time of his disappearance, he had only lived in Sault Ste. Marie for less than 3 months. He wore glasses, was known to smoke menthol cigarettes, and is described as thin, 5 feet 8 inches tall, 155 to 160 pounds, with brown eyes and brown hair to his ears, balding on top. Please consider subscribing to Ontario Cold Cases, a podcast, on Patreon, Spotify, YouTube, or Apple Podcasts. Hello, I'm Jay Nicoll from Nicoll Investigations, and this is an Ontario Cold Cases, the podcast, Missing Persons edition on Marni Parliament. The Niagara Regional Police Service continues to seek the public's help in locating a missing Niagara Falls woman. In a media release issued last Friday, April 26, police said officers are conducting a missing person investigation for 54-year-old Marni Parliament, who was last seen on Tuesday, April 9th, at a residence in Niagara Falls in the area of Caller and Coventry Roads. She communicated last by text message on April 15th. Family reported her missing on Thursday, April 18th, police said in a news release. On Sunday, April 28th, the body of a female was discovered in Niagara Falls waterway. Police said the body has been sent for an autopsy to determine a positive identity and that they are awaiting the results of the exam. Marni Parliament remains a missing person, Constable Philip Gavin said on Thursday morning in an email. That investigation is still active by 2 district detectives. Parliament is described as white, weighing 154 pounds, standing 5 feet 8 inches tall, with long, straight, blonde, brown hair. Thank you, and please consider subscribing to Ontario Cold Cases, the podcast, on Patreon, Spotify, YouTube, or Apple Podcasts. Hello, I'm Jay Nicoll from Nicoll Investigations, and we're here to tell you about some of the upcoming episodes of Ontario Cold Cases, the podcast. On the murder of Margaret MacDonald. On June 26, 1994, 80-year-old Margaret MacDonald was asleep in the early afternoon in her LaSalle's Boulevard home, situated near Yonge Street and Davisville Avenue. She had dinner plans later that evening with a friend. While asleep, an unknown intruder gained entry to MacDonald's home after forcing the glass sliding door open. Based on the pry marks of the point of entry, the suspect likely used a screwdriver or pry-like tool, police said. Police believe he broke in not knowing she was in there, and the rest what transpired was a result of him being inside her home and finding her in bed. Once the victim was discovered asleep in her home, the believed initial criminal intentions of property crime escalated into a vicious sexual assault and ended up as a brutal murder. Evidence is supported by the weapon of opportunity the offender used to attack her. It was a weapon the suspect did not bring to the crime scene. The suspect beat MacDonald with a giant pepper mill. It was a weapon of opportunity, police said. MacDonald's granddaughter was the person who discovered the body shortly after the homicide. Earlier that day, neighbors had reported observing two strangers knocking on other doors in the area. It's not known if these individuals are linked to MacDonald's murder. However, homicide investigators do have one crucial piece of evidence that links the unknown killer to the crime: his DNA. In 2016, Toronto police were able to establish the suspect's description in Ancestry, given the advancements in forensic phenotyping. He's described as being of possible European descent, with blue to intermediate colored eyes and dark hair. Police believe the killer was between 20 and 30 years of age at the time of the homicide, and now will be somewhere between the age of 50 and 60. A police sketch was previously released of the suspect, based on his DNA profile and 1994 witness information, that described him having long dark hair, olive skin, and dressed in leather tassels. There was no match of the offender's DNA when it was submitted to the National DNA Database, a setback that has not hindered the investigation moving forward. The Toronto Police Cold Case Unit are now focusing on the latest science that has seen some success with the identification of cold case homicide suspects in the last few years. Please consider subscribing to Ontario Cold Cases, the podcast, on Patreon, Spotify, YouTube, or Apple Podcasts. Hello, I'm Jay Nicoll from Nicoll Investigations, and I'm here to tell you about some of the upcoming episodes of Ontario Cold Cases, a podcast, on the murder of Paul Hentonen. Halton Regional Police Service Homicide Unit investigators are still seeking anyone with information regarding the death of Paul Hentonen, whose body was discovered Friday morning, May 17, 2002, in his apartment in Georgetown. Police released information regarding the deceased man's pickup truck, and attached to this release is a poster with the relevant information. Although a post-mortem was conducted, investigators are not releasing the cause of death at this time. Halton Regional Police detectives are still attempting to track the final movements of the victim and are also seeking information from anyone who may have seen the deceased man's pickup truck on Thursday, May 16th or Friday, May 17th, 2002. So please consider subscribing to Ontario Cold Cases, the podcast, on Patreon, Spotify, YouTube, or Apple Podcasts.